Hi everyone. Today we are going to take a look at chapters 25 through 27 and go through a couple important points. Let's go ahead and get started with chapter 25. Now, chapter 25 is a relatively short chapter. At the end of chapter 24, we find out that Tom Robinson was killed in prison and he was shot 17 times. And chapter 25 is just people reacting to that. So his death in the white community was talked about for about 2 days, and then people kind of swiftly forgot about it. And it reminds us of instances in our society today where something seems very important. People talk about it, but they quickly forget it when it doesn't impact them. And we see that the people of Macomb, the white community members of Macomb, actually blame Tom for his own death. And they make comments like, oh, Atticus Finch could have gotten him off on the appeal. And this indicates that they knew he was innocent the whole time. And they now are just saying like, oh, it's just like his kind to go and do something reckless and crazy when he had a chance to survive and save his own life. So even in his death, people are judgmental and cruel towards Tom. We do see, however, that Mr. Underwood, who is, he owns the Macomb Tribune, he writes a long editorial and he compares Tom's death to the death of songbirds. So again, we get this idea reiterated that it's a sin to kill a mockingbird and that we shouldn't kill someone who is so innocent and who has done nothing wrong. We also see at the very end of chapter 25 that Bob Ewell makes a comment that there is one down in reference to Tom and two to go, which we don't know what he means by this. Obviously, he wasn't at the prison or anything. He did not kill Tom. Well, literally killed Tom. His actions did lead to his death. But we don't know what he means by two more to go. And we don't know if he actually means that he's going to do anything here. Because as we've seen so far, he's pretty much a coward. At the start of chapter 26, we see that Scout is now in the 3rd grade, and she has to pass by the Radleys every day, and she brings up how she's no longer fearful of Boo Radley, and she even says that she feels bad for the way they treated Boo. She's like, no recluse would want little children peeping in their windows and reenacting their life on the front lawn, so she feels bad about the things the kids used to do in relation to Boo Radley. She also brings up how she remembers how Boo would leave them gifts and the kind acts that he did, such as the blanket and the sewed-up pants. Now, the remainder of the chapter focuses a lot on Scout's teacher, Mrs. Gates. This is a new teacher for us, and it's meant to show us the hypocrisy of this town, which we've seen a lot of that in recent chapters, but the hypocrisy we see in this chapter is focused around Mrs. Gates, her teacher. She has the students do a current event each week, and Cecil Jacobs brings in an article about Hitler. And she goes on and on about how awful Hitler is, how he's persecuting the Jews and other people within Germany, and how terrible it is. However, something just isn't sitting right with Scout, and she doesn't know how to verbalize it to Atticus, so she eventually in the chapter talks with Jem about it, and she says, I don't understand how someone like Mrs. Gates can hate Hitler so much, but then say nasty things about people in her own town. And she's referring to after the trial when she heard Mrs. Gates talking to somebody, and Mrs. Gates said the following quote. I'm going to read it to us now. This is on page 331. I heard her say it's time somebody taught him a lesson. They were getting way above themselves, and the next thing they think they can do is marry us. So, pretty awful comment by Mrs. Gates there as she's heading out of the courtroom. And by them, she's referring to the Black community members in Macomb. And we see here that she's making the comment that even if Tom Robinson really wasn't guilty, which everybody knew he was innocent upon leaving the court, that he was getting above himself by even associating with a white woman. So this comment here shows Scout that she is persecuting people within Macomb. However, she then makes these comments about how awful it is that Hitler and the Nazis are persecuting people in Germany. So Scout is starting to see, like, how can you hate Hitler so much and then be so nasty to people at home? So we start to see that Scout is starting to really open her eyes to people and how people can be hypocritical here. And Jem, in this scene, we still see that he's struggling with the trial, and he gets mad at Scout for even bringing it up and says he never wants to talk about it ever again. This brings us to chapter 27, and here's how Scout starts off the chapter. Things did settle down after a fashion, as Atticus said they would. By the middle of October, only 2 small things out of the ordinary happened to make home citizens. No, there were 3 things, and they did not directly concern us, the Finches, but in a way they did. So we know it's the middle of October. We come to find out that 3 things happen. 1, Mr. Yule loses his job with the WPA. Now, fun fact, the WPA was created to give people a job during the Great Depression. So to lose that, you had to be a really bad worker. And he loses this job due to laziness. However, what does he do? He doesn't take, the blame for that. He blames Atticus Finch. Now, we also see that Helen Robinson, Tom's wife, who hadn't been able to get a job, is hired by a man named Link Dees. And so Link Dees gives her a job, but he notices that she's walking a mile out of her way to get to work. And he finds out that she has been going the whole other way to avoid the Yule house because they've been saying nasty things to her. Bob Yule will follow her and say nasty things. So Link Dees ends up threatening Bob Yule and saying that he was going to turn him in if he kept on doing this. And finally, Bob Yule cuts his antics after Link Dees steps in. However, we again just see what an awful person Bob Yule is, that he's targeting this woman on her way to and from work, as if he had not already done enough to destroy her life and her family. The last thing that happens is that somebody tries to break into Judge Taylor's house. And we can assume that this most likely is Bob Yule. And we know that he has a vendetta pretty much against anybody having to do anything with the court and the trial that had happened. And so we see that all of these acts, stalking Helen Robinson, breaking into Judge Taylor's house when he thought nobody was there, blaming Atticus for him getting fired at his job, it indicates to us just, 1, what a coward he is, but also just that he has literally lost any sort of credibility that he's had within this town, and he's just really angry and wants to, make other people's lives inconvenient as well. We also see that because of some incidents in previous years, they're not going to have, just a free-for-all Halloween, apparently like they normally do. They're going to have a pageant and like a fun fair at the high school. And Scout gets cast as the Ham in the school production. Now, this is a pretty funny costume. You should Google it. And Atticus and Aunt Alexandra decide not to go that evening to see the pageant. They're too wiped out. So Jem is going to take Scout to the high school. Now, Scout makes an interesting comment on page 340. She says, "Thus began our longest journey together," in reference to them leaving for the high school. Now, interesting thing here, we know they live very close to the high school. So it's not a physically long journey. So she seems to be foreshadowing that something is either going to happen on their way to the high school, while they're at the high school, or on the way back to the high school. And you're going to have to read chapter 28 to see what that something is. All right, if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to your teacher. See ya!